What I wanted to talk to you about today is just talking about technology transformation, that function. It's probably been sort of almost written in law that we don't often change or actually improve our applicant tracking systems. In addition to that, it's very, very difficult adding in technology. The reason being is because the cost-benefit case can be extremely hard to prove and to get through. You're fighting for HR budget, you're fighting the IT function, finance and marketing for that money and that investment inside your organisations. So I just wanted to speak a little bit for 20 minutes today about some of the work we're doing with Talent Link and also in Santander. Hopefully something that you can take away. Please feel free to ask me the questions within sort of commercial bounds. And then I was going to break this down into sort of 4 key areas. First of all, the situation that we found ourselves in what we needed to do, some of the challenges that we're facing. The second part, the drivers for change. And that becomes important because we are persuading other people, the HR director, the CFO, to put their hands in their pocket and give us a bit more extra money. What we decided to do next and why, and I'll be blunt, this is always about some compromises that need to be made in those decisions. We can't always have exactly what we want. And then where we've kind of got to in terms of that move and setting ourselves up for the future. Okay, I don't know in terms of slides. Yep. Okay, brilliant. That always helps. Okay, so we talked about the agenda. Right, okay, reality. IT systems, HR systems, is absolutely a spaghetti mess. Yeah, in this, oh wow, that certainly come on booming. I'll just dial it down a little bit before we break people's eardrums. So let's talk a little about the sort of business situation that we find ourselves. In the banking industry, there are a huge range of threats to the established players. And they start from startup banks right through to fintech, who are starting to nibble away and present new solutions to customers that are more efficient, easier to access, less bureaucratic, and just faster and cheaper to administrate. So the incumbent banks are having to change their strategy in 2 key areas. First one is really about transformation of technology. I mean, that's reasonably simple, but imagine most of your bank accounts are held on systems that are 20 years old. That's reality. Nice shiny front end and web, but the core data sets are being held on 20-year-old technology. The reason being is actually moving these on from here is tremendously difficult, and everybody will see some of the challenges that TSB faced in the last 12 months in just that journey. The second part of it is about customer service. No longer is it acceptable to sit behind a window, give somebody a 20-page form and ask them to fill it out to get a loan, or spend 5-10 minutes just paying in a check. These things have got to be done instantaneous, and that takes a different style of customer service. So as a bank, we face these issues. We need to transform our workforce. In our estimates, that's about 1/3 of what the people are doing at the moment. It's going to have to change. They're going to have to change. That's huge. So that's the first part of it, and really a drive for where talent acquisition, both from internal mobility and also external recruitment, needs to be facing. The next part of that is just, I'm just being honest, brutal here, so please keep it in the room. Is that our candidate journey was horrible for people, right? We had 3 different systems on Park, 2 CRMs, 1 ATS, okay? Candidates having to access different types of systems to do different parts of things and collect different pieces of data. That's not a great candidate journey. And it's also really, really important, if you're into the world of customer service, your internal systems and processes need to fit what you're trying to do for your customers. If you make it really bureaucratic for your internal staff, there's a likelihood that will replicate in your customer service. So we needed to change that. Not only that, we were moving lots of our workforce around, right? The COBOL developer suddenly had to become a Java developer. The program managers, the project managers all had to get their heads around Agile. skill sets they've never been trained in. And sometimes the natural reaction is to go out and get more of those people or someone from different rather than retraining the own folk you've got. So you've got to move people around. It's got to be an easy journey for them. We've got to work with the unions as well. Next piece is really the hiring manager. In the world of that, in terms of that, we now have a myriad of ways that we can bring resource into an organisation. Contingent labour, contractors, statement of work, PAYE temps, FTCs, perms. How is the manager going to make that choice and that decision? How are we going to manage that and make that an easy passage for them? And, you know, at one point when I started this journey, we were asking the managers to fill out 20 data points in order just to get a job recreation up and running. Now, I'll talk about the journey, how we sort of slightly slim that down a bit. But it was so painful that we eventually had to put an administration resource onto it just to get them through that process. The next point really here is the one one of those who do know me is about data. But we were not effective in communicating to our colleagues in HR and the business around about that journey in resourcing, what was happening. And even then, it was preventing us getting into the much more interesting area of adding real business value and how we bring that across. So making sure that the function had business relevance. Why are we doing it? It's not about time to hire or cost per hire, but what is the real output of what we're trying to do? And the last part really is a preparation for robotics and AI. Again, robotics and AI is not something about the future. These tools and systems are available today. They've been in commercial production for a number of years. They're starting to get through all the initial teething problems. The cost is relatively cheap if you know where to get them from. But the one thing is that you can't connect them up to spaghetti. You can't connect them up to bad core systems because they won't work effectively. So we needed to do all of those things came together in terms of driving for that change. Okay, so that's tremendous. One of the things that then we had decided to do in the next part of it is what did we do? What did we decide to do about that? If you're like me, and you can see and connect to everybody else in the market, there are loads of fantastic vendors out there. You just have to walk through the concourse there in terms of that, all issuing slightly different shades of technology. What do you pick? Who do you go with? I once did a presentation on ATS providers. Okay, I came up with a slide for them of 50 different providers. I probably could have stretched it out to 100 to 200. So what do you choose? Which CRM system? Which flavor? So the first part of this is really going back to our technology vendor in terms of talent link and saying, hey, what are we not doing here from your side of things? Okay, what are we not using? And by the way, there was lots of stuff that we just hadn't even touched inside of the system that we wanted to do, but was there and available for us. And then the second part was going to our RPO partner at the time in terms of AMS and saying, what do you think about the technology setup? So we started to get everybody working together, and we decided to make technology one of the strategic themes for the resourcing function. The second part of that was then rationalizing what we had. And this is where I talked about earlier on about compromises and being very, very focused about what you need and what you're doing. We knew at the stage that we were behind where we wanted to be from a technology perspective, so we weren't necessarily going to make the leap straight to leading edge straight away, but we just needed to get some core things right. So the first hard part of that is then looking at the systems that we had in Park and saying, actually, we don't need them, right? That's rationalizing it down. So those 3 systems we're taking down to 2, and eventually we'll move that down to 1 system. Why? Because our current ATS provider has all of that functionality in there. Some of them might do something slightly better than the other, but actually from an operational perspective, from inside the function, actually doesn't make that much difference. And one of the things I've always sometimes questioned myself and asked yourself as an audience is just think about, is it really worth the effort in terms of the implementation? I think the The next part that we came to a realization around was reviewing and understanding, and again, I talked about earlier where I rob ideas from other people. I rob this from our own IT department and the chief operating officer, and a conversation he was having with us about technology, is you need to look about and understand ecosystems. And what do we mean by that? Certain bits of IT plays well with other bits of IT, and some of it doesn't play well with it at all. So it's recognizing in your core technology set what is already connected. So have they built their integrations to the selection tools? Have they built a connection to the CRMs that you like to use? Is it the pre-employment screening tool? Does that connect up? Right, and it's understanding those and starting to operate inside of that eco environment. So we took a conscious decision, again, to strip out some of the selection tools that we're using and then work more closely with our ATS provider around what actually worked and integrated closely. Now, you can start to build up a picture because we're starting to simplify that engagement. We're starting to make it easier for candidates because they're coming in through one portal. We're starting to make it easier for the hiring managers because, again, we're only asking them to deal with one system. The last part of this was then probably untying and looking at our own processes. So quite often, sometimes there is a focus, perhaps a natural focus to some areas, not suggesting anybody here to blame the technology vendors or whatever, when we actually haven't looked at our own processes and the bureaucracy that we're putting on the side of candidates and hiring managers. So part of that was stripping that back. I took one small part of the business in terms of the IT. Well, I say it's a small part, it's about 50% of what the bank does nowadays. But we then rebuilt the hiring process completely. And we looked at our technology, we matched that up to what it could do, and then we redesigned the process around it, not trying to get the process to fit or get the technology to fit our process. Because then we could use all the best bits from what our RPO was saying, what Talent Link was saying to us, and we can merge that into that. So I talked about that 20 or 30 data points we're asking the managers. We took that down to 5 to get a job launched, right? That's a quantum difference. So in other parts of the bank, we still haven't finished all that transformation. We're still having to get administrators in to help the managers set up the jobs. But in the technology function, the managers are all doing it themselves. Why? Because we made it easy and we made it relevant to their job in terms of what we're doing. So where did that lead us, to as a function? Probably just again, going to pick on 4 sort of key areas. One is about closer integration. The second is about simplifying technology. Much better control over our data, and that's opening up some really, really interesting areas. And then 4, set for the future. I'll explain that, a little more about those over the next couple of minutes. First of all, there's a human element to this, and that human element is about building a closer partnership with your partners. Too often, we treated them like suppliers, rather than bringing them into a place of genuine partnership and working closely together. And actually, we gained a huge amount of knowledge for the organisation, both the team that I was operating with internally and the rest of HR, by just asking the supply base in terms of Talent Link and AMS, what do you think? Right? Didn't accept everything they said to us, by the way. We made our own choices. But it was useful because people always react well to just being asked, what's your opinion? What's your experience? What do you think should happen here? So just by that simple act of getting them engaged, we started to get a closer partnership. And we started to open up and use the tools much more effectively. And we started to get an engagement. And it's quite interesting, even working with our RPO partner, their reaction to this is, well, we thought you wanted this. No, we didn't. But nobody had had that conversation. So it's just, human beings. With all that technology, we still have to work as a partnership. Simplifying the systems, and this is where it probably for me gets really interesting. Once you get down to simplifying it, just think about what you really need to do and what the business needs. And is integrating another system going to add work to your workloads? Is it additional maintenance? Are you going to create bits that fail? You know, if you create APIs between things, getting really technical now, somebody needs to maintain those links. So it's thinking very, very carefully. And by reducing down into two systems and eventually into one, we simplified the landscape. And that allowed us to start building for the future. So in effect, what we're able to do now is we've built for those of you into the technology, we've built a layer of a zero over the top of it, standard sort of database. But what it means is all the data gets pulled up into there. Why is that useful? Because it means that we start to use the data more effectively. It also builds a layer for automation and robotics, and I'll come on to that in a second. It also then allowed us to put in a analytical tool over the top. In this instance, we used Power BI from Microsoft. It's another Microsoft tool. It's cheap, it's easy. Whether it's the best on the market is another question. There are other tools on there that I may favor if I had the money. But the reality is it then gave us the access to start combining both HR and talent acquisition data and business data, and taking things like CSAT scores from the contact centers, some of the sales figures, combine that, and starting to work through with our selection tools and find out what's really, really happening. And that is just by not necessarily adding in more technology, it's about simplifying it. And that brings me on to the point about better control over our data. Everybody's had to live through and work through GDPR. And mining that. And the simple lesson of that is the less interfaces, the more control, the more centralized you have that data, the easier it is to control, the easier it is to give access to the candidates to control that data. Not only that, in a modern business going forward now, it is really about data. And in order for us to survive as a function, whether it's talent acquisition or HR, we've now got to start on that journey of combining those two sets of data, that business and HR data, to give business insights. The reality is that some of our hiring managers and executives in the C-suite are not that interested in time to hire. I even had organisations where people have not been that interested in cost per hire. Can you believe that? The amount of times everybody's budget's been hit over the last few years. But the reality here is once we get onto that agenda, it provides the platform. The last piece really is about automation and AI. It's coming. It's not only coming, it's here and it's arrived. But that we are learning some lessons about the implementation of that technology. We're just in the process of starting to roll out scheduling chatbots and some of the robotics inside of that. And the reason we can do that is, again, because in terms of transforming and working closely with our ATS provider, we're able to put a layer of zero over the top, and that ports all the information, and then that provides the basis for you for attaching the chatbots. For the technologist, the IT folk, this is a lot easier for them to do, and it's a lot cheaper and more effective. But once you're there, you can start moving things in and out of that environment quite easily. So I think at the end of that journey, you know, we started in summing up, we started at a point where we had pain points in the business. We started from a business perspective, and then how that dressed down into that candidate management journey and how it's feeding. That provided us the drivers, so it allowed me to have that conversation with the group HRD, with the CFO, and in terms of that, and getting some of the funding to help us take us forward. But lastly, then, it's provided some powerful platforms for me in terms of, and by the way, we're not there yet. We've still got a lot more work to do, but it's provided a platform in which to improve the candidate and hiring journey. But for me, the most powerful bit is really around the data that we're now getting and we've got access to, and also the platform for automation. Because most of the transactional jobs that we do today, even for things like sourcing candidates, are going to get done by AI and chatbots. And that's kind of what's happening now. So we need to form the basis for it. So that is very, very simply the journey at Santander and Technology. In terms of cost reductions, and if I can leave you just with a couple of figures. Yes, we have massively, in the areas where we simplified the process, the time to hire has come down by about 5, 6, no, in fact it was 30 days, because from we did a massive leap, and then another 5 to 6 days. We've saved 12% of the overall recruitment budget in terms of that, and we've been able to reinvest that in other areas in branding and marketing. So they're powerful effects. And I think because of the technology changes nowadays, we're now on the cusp of another revolution in terms of our technology base, but we have to look at the current systems that we've got and get them ready for it. Thank you very, very much for listening to me and giving me the time to stand up here.